Hey my Reddit story lovers, welcome back to Bedtime Blocks. Tonight we've got some emotional confessions. If you enjoy these, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss the next one. Now let's dive in. Story 1. She cheated on me with my best friend. You ever get that gut punch feeling when something you trusted without question suddenly cracks wide open? That was me the night I found out the truth. I always thought my girlfriend and my best friend were two of the safest people in my life, the ones who'd never betray me. Turns out, they were the ones I should have been watching the most. It started with little things I tried to brush off. She'd laugh at his jokes harder than mine. He'd text her in the group chat, then continue privately when I wasn't included. I told myself I was overthinking, paranoid even. We'd all known each other for years. We'd been through birthdays, breakups, crappy apartments, and late-night drives together. Why would I suspect either of them? One night, though, I couldn't ignore it anymore. We were hanging out at my place, the three of us, watching some forgettable action movie. She was curled up on the couch, he was sitting on the floor, and I was in the kitchen grabbing beers. When I came back, the air felt different. She was smiling at him in a way I hadn't seen in months. It wasn't just friendly, it was intimate. I felt a twinge in my gut, but I forced a smile, sat down, and pretended not to notice. That's what you do, right? You convince yourself you're imagining things because the alternative is too painful. But later that week, the pieces started falling together. She came home late, saying she was with friends. He stopped answering my calls as quickly. The more I ignored it, the more obvious it became. The breaking point came when I noticed her phone light up while she was in the shower. I didn't want to be that person, the one who snoops. But the notification was from him. And the preview said just enough to knock the wind out of me. Last night was perfect. Can't stop thinking about it. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. My heart was pounding in my ears, drowning out every other sound. I didn't know what to do. Confront her? Confront him? Pretend I hadn't seen it and let it eat me alive? That was the moment I realized my life was about to split into a before and after. I sat there with her phone in my hand, staring at those words like they were carved into my skull. My chest felt tight, like someone had tied a rope around my lungs and was pulling harder with every second. I wanted to believe it wasn't what it looked like, that maybe, last night, meant something innocent, but deep down I knew. No one writes. Can't stop thinking about it. To a friend. When she came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, humming some song under her breath, I shoved the phone back onto the nightstand and tried to act normal. But every smile she gave me looked fake, every word she spoke sounded hollow. I couldn't even look her in the eye without hearing his voice in my head. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to her breathing, trying to make sense of how the two people I trusted most could do this. My mind kept replaying every moment we'd all spent together, twisting them into something darker. Every time she laughed at his jokes, every time he brushed against her arm, every time they exchanged glances I thought were nothing, they all became proof. By morning, my hands were still shaking. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I saw your phone last night, I blurted as she was pouring coffee. The words came out rough, like gravel. She froze, mug halfway to her lips. What? Don't play dumb, I said. The message. From him. Last night was perfect. What was perfect, huh? What exactly can't he stop thinking about? For a second, her face drained of color. Then she set the mug down carefully, like she was defusing a bomb. It's not what you think, she said, her voice too calm. Then explain it, I snapped. My heart was pounding so loud I thought the neighbors might hear it. She opened her mouth, closed it again, and that silence told me more than any excuse ever could. Because when someone really has nothing to hide, they fight to explain. She just stood there, eyes darting away from mine, lips pressed tight. And in that silence, my world came crashing down. I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was at the kitchen table, staring at the wood grain like it could offer me answers. My voice came out quieter this time, shaky in a way I hated. How long? She flinched. It was subtle, but I saw it. Her hand trembled as she pulled at the hem of her sleeve. It just happened once, she whispered, eyes fixed on the counter instead of me. Once. The word sliced through me. A pathetic, desperate attempt to minimize it. But it didn't matter if it was once or 100 times, the damage was done. Don't lie to me, I said, my throat tightening. How long? Her eyes finally met mine, and that's when I saw it. Guilt, raw and heavy, etched across her face. The kind you can't fake. A couple months, she admitted, voice cracking. A couple months. 2 people I loved most in this world sneaking around behind my back while I thought everything was fine. Every late-night text, every inside joke, every time she said she was staying late at work. Suddenly it all made sense. I felt sick. My stomach churned, bile creeping up my throat. My best friend. My girlfriend. Together. I pushed my chair back and stood, the legs scraping against the floor with a sound that made her flinch again. I need air, I muttered, heading for the door. Wait, please, she said, reaching out, but I jerked away from her touch like it burned. Outside, the morning air was sharp and cold, carrying the smell of rain-soaked pavement. I stood on the porch, gripping the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. My chest was heaving, but no matter how deep I breathed, I couldn't seem to get enough air. Memories of him flooded in. Every time he told me, "I've got your back, man." Every time he'd been there when I needed him. Every time I thought, this is the kind of friend you keep for life. And now, all I could think was, how do you forgive someone who burned down your entire world? I didn't even realize I'd walked until I was halfway down the block, hoodie pulled tight around me, shoes splashing through puddles. My phone buzzed in my pocket again and again, her name lighting up the screen, then his. I couldn't bring myself to answer either of them. Every step I took, the anger inside me built higher. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. Everyone knew how close the 3 of us were. What if other people had seen it before I did? What if I had been the only one living blind, proudly parading around with the perfect girlfriend and the loyal best friend, while they were laughing behind my back? By the time I reached the park, my chest hurt from holding it all in. I sat on a damp bench, head in my hands, and finally let out a raw, broken sound I didn't recognize as my own. That's when my phone buzzed again. This time, a text from him. "Bro, let me explain. Please. It's not how it looks." My vision blurred with rage. Not how it looks. I'd seen the messages. I'd heard her voice. I'd watched her face crumble under the weight of her own guilt. What explanation could possibly fix that? I typed back with shaking fingers. "How could you do this to me? You were supposed to be my brother." The reply came almost instantly. "I didn't mean for it to happen. We never wanted to hurt you." The words felt like poison. They thought not meaning it made it better? That sneaking around for months was somehow less cruel because they didn't mean to. My stomach twisted. I stared out across the empty park, the swings swaying gently in the breeze, the smell of wet grass rising in the air. This was the place we used to come as kids, the 3 of us. We'd sit here for hours, dreaming about the future. I never imagined the future would look like this. For the first time, I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt replaced. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. The thought of seeing her face, hearing her voice, pretending for even a second that things could ever be normal again, it was unbearable. Instead, I crashed at a buddy's place across town. Someone who didn't know her, didn't know him, didn't ask questions when I showed up at the door looking like I'd been hollowed out from the inside. Lying awake on his couch, staring at the ceiling, I kept replaying everything. The first time I introduced them. The way they clicked right away. The trust one felt, believing I'd finally built this little circle of people who'd always have my back. And now, that same circle felt like a noose tightening around my neck. The next morning, her messages flooded in, walls of text that swung between begging for forgiveness and insisting it just happened because things between us had been rough. As if that somehow made it my fault. As if me being tired from work, or distracted some nights, justified her crawling into his arms instead of talking to me. I didn't reply. Not once. When he finally called, I let it ring out. Then another. Then another. His voice filled my voicemail, repeating the same pathetic script. I'm sorry, bro. I didn't mean it. I don't know what I was thinking. But he knew exactly what he was thinking. Every secret meeting, every late-night text, every lie told straight to my face. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice. Over and over again. And I realized something as I sat there, phone buzzing in my hand. They didn't just break my heart. They broke the person I thought I was. The guy who trusted too easily. The guy who believed love and loyalty were unshakable. I don't know if I'll ever forgive them. Hell, I don't know if I'll ever trust anyone the same way again. But I do know this. The version of me who believed in them, who believed in us, he's gone. And in his place, there's someone who knows just how quickly the people you love most can turn into strangers. Story 2. I got her fired. You ever do something you can't take back? Something that felt justified in the moment, but the fallout keeps circling back in your head like a broken record? That's where I'm at right now. I got her fired. And even though part of me says she deserved it, another part keeps whispering that I might have gone too far. It started at the office, the kind of beige-walled, stale coffee-smelling environment where time feels slower than it should. The hum of the fluorescent lights always sat in the background, just loud enough to remind you that you were stuck there. For months, I'd kept my head down, doing my work, trying not to get dragged into the petty drama that floated around like secondhand smoke. But then she showed up. Let's call her Emily. At first, I thought she was just overly ambitious, the kind of person who wanted to climb the ladder fast. But it didn't take long for me to realize she wasn't climbing the ladder, she was stepping on people's fingers while they tried to hold on. She had this way of making me feel small, like every idea I'd brought to the table was laughable, every effort not quite good enough. And she didn't stop at me. She undermined people in meetings, take credit for work that wasn't hers, and somehow still charm management into thinking she was indispensable. I tried to ignore it. I told myself to focus on my own work, that her behavior wasn't my problem. But when she started targeting me directly, subtle digs at first, then sharper, more public jabs, I knew I couldn't keep quiet forever. The breaking point came during a client presentation I had spent weeks preparing. I was mid-sentence when she cut me off, flashing her too bright smile, and rephrased my entire pitch like it had been her idea all along. The client nodded approvingly. My boss smiled at her. And I stood there, my mouth dry, watching months of effort slip through my fingers. That's when the thought first hit me. What if she wasn't untouchable? What if I could pull the mask off? And once I let that thought in, I couldn't let it go. After that meeting, I sat at my desk staring at my screen, hands trembling over the keyboard. My emails blurred, words swimming together while her laugh echoed in the back of my head. Everyone else had moved on, but I couldn't. I kept replaying the way she hijacked my work, how easily the client credited her while I stood there like a ghost in my own presentation. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes I saw her smug smile. And underneath the anger was something uglier, shame. I hated how powerless I'd felt in that room, how quickly she'd erased me in front of everyone. The next morning, I walked into the office and found her leaning against my desk, chatting with another coworker like she owned the place. She barely looked at me as she slid a stack of paperwork onto my keyboard. "Do me a favor and sort this before lunch, will you? You're better at the boring stuff." The words landed like a slap. She didn't even see me as competition, just someone to use. I knew then that I couldn't keep letting her get away with it. She wasn't just ambitious, she was toxic. And toxic spreads fast if no one stops it. So I started watching her closer. Not in an obsessive way, but with the kind of attention you give when you're waiting for someone to slip. And it didn't take long. I noticed she left work early more often than not, slipping out before the clock hit 5. I saw her, forgetting to CC the team on important emails, then acting surprised when deadlines were missed. I overheard phone calls where she spoke casually about side projects she was running on company time. I started taking notes. Dates, times, exact phrases. It felt dirty, sneaky even, but with every detail I wrote down, the weight on my chest got a little lighter. Weeks went by, and my notebook filled with proof. And with every page I realized I wasn't imagining it. She was cutting corners, breaking rules, and gambling that no one would ever call her out. Until I did. The chance came sooner than I expected. It was a Thursday afternoon, the office heavy with that end-of-week fatigue, when Emily slipped up. She was supposed to be preparing a report for a high-profile client, one that had everyone on edge because we couldn't afford to lose their business. Instead, she spent most of the afternoon laughing on personal calls and scrolling through her phone. By the time the deadline hit, nothing was ready. And when the boss called her into his office, she didn't even flinch. She just walked in, smooth as ever, and came out a few minutes later with a sympathetic pat on the shoulder and a fresh excuse. Apparently I had forgotten to send her the data she needed. That was it. The final straw. I went home that night buzzing with adrenaline, pacing my living room with my notebook in hand. Every entry I'd written felt heavier now, like each word was a loaded bullet. I knew if I pulled the trigger, there was no going back. By midnight I'd made my decision. The next morning, I asked for a private meeting with our manager. My palms were sweaty as I slid the folder across his desk, every detail laid out, her early exits, her side projects, the calls, the missed deadlines. And then I told him about the client presentation. About the lies. About the way she'd been building herself up by tearing the rest of us down. He didn't say much at first. Just flipped through the pages, brow furrowed deeper with every line. Then he leaned back in his chair, sighed, and said, "I'll handle it." That weekend was the longest of my life. My stomach twisted every time I thought about what I'd done. Maybe I'd gone too far. Maybe I'd just nuked my own reputation by ratting her out. But when Monday rolled around, the news spread fast. Emily had been terminated effective immediately. No goodbyes, no explanations. Her desk was already cleared out when I arrived. And just like that, she was gone. The office felt different without her, like the air had finally cleared after months of smoke. People weren't walking on eggshells anymore, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't dread stepping through the glass doors in the morning. Still, the empty desk where she used to sit gnawed at me. At first, no one said much. But whispers started floating through the cubicles soon enough. "Did you hear what happened? I can't believe they actually fired her." Some people sounded relieved, others suspicious. And a few pairs of eyes lingered on me a little too long, like they'd already guessed I'd had something to do with it. I kept my head down, answering emails, trying not to listen. But guilt clung to me like static. Yes, she'd deserved consequences. Yes, I'd told the truth. But there was a difference between knowing that in my head and feeling it in my chest. A week later, one of my coworkers pulled me aside in the break room. He glanced around to make sure we were alone before lowering his voice. "You did it, didn't you? You're the reason she's gone." My throat went dry. I didn't confirm, didn't deny. Just stared into my coffee like it held answers. He sighed, leaning back against the counter. "Look, I'm not saying she didn't deserve it. But you better watch your back. People don't forget stuff like this." That night, lying in bed, his words echoed in my head. People don't forget. And sure enough, the shift started. Little things at first. Coworkers who used to chat with me at lunch now avoided my table. Conversation stopped when I walked into a room. The relief I'd felt at her being gone curdled into something heavier. Because while she was toxic, she'd been loud enough, bold enough, to draw all the attention. With her gone, that spotlight felt like it had swung directly onto me. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if I'd actually won, or if I'd just painted a target on my own back. It's strange how quickly you can go from invisible to infamous. Before Emily, I was just another face in the office, reliable, quiet, the guy who got his work done. But after she was fired, I became the story. Some people saw me as the one who finally stood up to her. Others painted me as the backstabber who got a coworker canned. The truth lived somewhere in the middle, but no one wanted to hear that. I kept telling myself I'd done the right thing. That someone had to stop her before she sabotaged another project, or wrecked another person's confidence. And when I walked past her empty desk, part of me still felt relief. But the other part, the part that woke me up at 2 a.m. Replaying the look on my boss's face as he read my notes, wondered if I had crossed a line I couldn't come back from. Weeks passed, and slowly the office adjusted. A new hire filled her chair, and the rhythm of work picked back up. But the way people looked at me never went back to normal. Some offered forced smiles, others avoided me entirely. My reputation wasn't poisoned exactly, but it was marked. Stained. One afternoon, I caught myself staring at my reflection in the darkened monitor, asking a question I couldn't answer. Was it worth it? Because yes, she was gone. Yes, the constant undermining had stopped. But in removing her, I'd also changed myself. I wasn't just the quiet, dependable coworker anymore. I was the guy who proved he could play dirty if pushed far enough. And maybe that's the hardest part to live with, not the fact that I got her fired, but that I know, deep down, if I had to do it all over again, I probably still would. Story 4. She stole my house. You never think a house can be stolen from you. Houses are supposed to be solid, immovable things, anchors in a storm. Mine was more than that. It was the first real place I ever called mine, the result of years of double shifts, skipped vacations, and nights where I ate instant noodles just to scrape enough together for the down payment. Every brick felt like proof that I'd survived. And then she took it. It sounds dramatic, I know. People lose houses in divorces all the time. Papers get signed, assets get split, lawyers get paid. But that's not what happened here. This wasn't a clean division or a fair negotiation. This was betrayal written into legal forms, signed behind my back, and sealed with a smile I'll never forget. Her name was already on the mortgage. That was my first mistake. We weren't married, but after a year of living together, I thought it would make sense. We're a team, she'd said, kissing me in the half-finished living room as paint fumes lingered in the air. And back then I believed her. Things started unraveling slowly. Fights over money. Fights over time. Fights over nothing at all. She'd roll her eyes when I worked late, I'd snap when she spent on things we didn't need. We still laughed sometimes, still held hands, but the cracks were spreading. The day it all fell apart, I came home to an empty closet and a note on the counter. This isn't working. Don't call me. At first, I thought it was just a breakup. Painful, sure, but survivable. Until a letter arrived a week later, thick envelope, official seal. My stomach dropped as I read the words, ownership transfer. Mortgage reassignment. And at the bottom, her signature, neat and clean. She hadn't just left me. She'd taken the house with her. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Some kind of clerical error. I drove straight to the bank with the letter in my hand, heart pounding, rehearsing what I'd say. But the woman behind the counter just gave me that practiced, polite smile and said, "According to our records, the mortgage has already been refinanced under her name only." Her name only. The words echoed in my skull as I stumbled out into the parking lot. The sun was glaring down, but I felt cold all over. How could she just sign me out of my own home? Didn't my blood, sweat, and years of sacrifice count for anything? When I finally got her on the phone, she didn't sound angry or guilty, just done. "You'll be fine," she said, like she was talking about the weather. "You're better off without me. I'll take care of the payments. You don't have to worry." I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all that came out was, "That was my house." Her sigh crackled through the speaker. "It was our house. And now it's mine. Let it go." Then the line went dead. 4 days I couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. I just sat in my car outside the place that used to be mine, staring at the windows I'd washed, the door I'd painted, the porch where we once drank cheap wine and talked about forever. Curtains drawn, lights on, her silhouette moving across the living room that I'd built. It was like watching a ghost live my life while I stood on the outside, shivering. When I finally met with a lawyer, the truth hit harder than any punch. Because my name was never fully secured on the deed. Because she'd maneuvered the refinancing paperwork when things were still good. Because I trusted her, I had nothing. No rights. No claim. No home. And no one to blame but myself for believing her when she said, "We're a team." The lawyer's office smelled faintly of stale coffee and paper, that dry scent of old files and ink. He flipped through the stack of documents I'd brought, his expression tightening with every page. Finally, he set them down and looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "You don't have much of a case," he said, voice low and even. "Her name's on the deed. The refinancing was approved. You didn't contest it when it happened. Legally, it's hers." The words landed like stones in my stomach. Legally, it's hers. I left his office in a daze, clutching papers that now felt like funeral notices. Outside, the city moved on without me, horns honking, people rushing to lunch, laughter spilling from a cafe. All while I felt like the ground had opened beneath my feet. That night, I drove past the house again. The porch light was on, spilling yellow across the steps I'd once sanded by hand. Her car sat in the driveway. Through the window, I could see shadows moving, her and someone else. A man's silhouette. My chest tightened until I thought it might split. Not only had she taken the house, but she'd filled it with someone new. I sat there for almost an hour, engine idling, fingers clenched around the steering wheel. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head. Pounding on the door, demanding answers, screaming until my throat tore. But in the end, I drove away, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror until it was just another shadow in the night. The next morning, I started packing what little I had left. A few boxes of clothes, some tools, the old photo albums she hadn't bothered to take. Each item felt like a reminder of the years I'd poured into a future that no longer existed. Friends told me to let it go. "It's just a house," they said. But they didn't understand. It wasn't just a house. It was proof of who I was, what I'd built, what I'd sacrificed for. And now it was gone. But the worst part was knowing she hadn't just taken bricks and walls. She'd taken the one place in the world that felt like mine. I ended up crashing on a friend's couch for the first few weeks. His apartment was small, cluttered with pizza boxes and game controllers, nothing like the place I'd worked so hard to create. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of traffic outside, trying not to picture her sitting in my living room with him. People kept telling me it was a fresh start, that maybe losing the house was a blessing in disguise. But it didn't feel like a start, it felt like an erasure. Every photo of me sanding floors, every trip to the hardware store, every weekend I spent painting walls instead of going out, it was all wiped away. Like I'd never been there at all. One evening, I drove past again. I told myself it was just curiosity, but deep down I knew it was obsession. The curtains were open, and I could see her laughing, a glass of wine in her hand, sitting on the couch we picked out together. The man beside her reached over, touched her knee, and she leaned into him like they'd been living there forever. Something inside me cracked. I pulled over 2 blocks away, shut off the car, and just sat there shaking. Not from anger, though that was there too, but from grief. Because it wasn't just about losing her. It wasn't even just about losing the house. It was about losing the life I thought I was building, the future I thought I could count on. The next morning, I made myself a promise. I couldn't get the house back. I couldn't force her to regret what she'd done. But I could start over. I could build again, even if it meant starting from nothing. It was a bitter kind of determination, but it was the only thing that kept me from collapsing completely. So I picked up extra shifts. I started looking at rentals. And slowly, piece by piece, I tried to remind myself that a house wasn't the only proof of who I was. But late at night, when the world went quiet, I still saw her silhouette in the windows of the place I once called home. It took months before I stopped driving past the old place. At first, it was a compulsion, like scratching at a wound you know won't heal if you keep touching it. I'd circle the block at night, headlights off, just to see if her car was in the driveway. Just to see if the lights were on in the rooms I once called mine. But every time, I left feeling smaller, emptier, more hollow than before. Eventually, I realized the house wasn't mine anymore, not just legally but in spirit. It didn't carry my laughter, my sweat, my dreams. It carried hers now, and his, and whoever else she let inside. And as much as it broke me, I had to let it go. I found a small rental on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, peeling paint, creaky floors, a view of the highway instead of a backyard. But it was mine. My name on the lease. My key in the lock. The first night I slept there, curled up on a mattress on the floor with boxes still stacked around me, I realized something important. Sometimes survival doesn't look like triumph. Sometimes it just looks like showing up again, even when the ground has been ripped out from under you. Do I still think about that house? All the time. About the porch I built, the walls I painted, the future I thought I'd live inside. Do I still feel bitter? Of course. But bitterness is a weight, and if I carry it forever, I'll never build anything new. So now, when people ask about it, I just tell them the truth. She took the house. She signed my name away. And I lost something I'll never get back. But what I don't say is this: one day, I'll build again. And when I do, it'll be stronger. It'll be mine alone. And no one will ever be able to take it from me. Story 5. She went missing. The night she didn't come home, I told myself it was nothing. People get caught up with friends, lose track of time, fall asleep at a cousin's place. I sat on the couch, phone in my hand, staring at the front door like it would swing open any second and she'd walk in, rolling her eyes at me for worrying. But the hours stretched thin. Midnight turned into 2 a.m., then 3. Her phone went from ringing, to voicemail, to dead. By sunrise, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. Something was wrong. We hadn't been in a great place. Arguments that started small but never seemed to end, silences that lasted longer than they should. But she'd never disappeared. Not like this. Not without a word. I drove to her sister's place first. Knocked until my knuckles hurt. Nothing. Then I circled through the places she liked, the cafe by the park, the gym, even the bookstore where she'd wandered the aisles for hours. No one had seen her. No one even knew she was missing yet. By the time I walked into the police station, my shirt stuck to my back with sweat, my voice was raw. I told them everything I knew, where she'd been, what she was wearing, the last text she'd sent me. The officer's expression was careful, professional, but his eyes said something I didn't want to hear. Adults go missing all the time. Sometimes by choice. But this wasn't her choice. I could feel it. In the way the house felt too still, in the way her things were left behind. Her purse sat by the door. Her toothbrush still damp. She hadn't left. She'd been taken, from me, from her life, from the fragile little world we were still trying to hold together. And standing there in that fluorescent-lit station, I felt something cold crawl into my chest. Because for the first time, I wondered if I'd ever see her again. The first 24 hours were a blur of phone calls and dead ends. I dialed every friend she had, every coworker, even people she hadn't spoken to in years. Each one answered with the same sharp inhale, the same panicked questions. What do you mean missing? Are you sure? Yes, I was sure. I barely ate. Barely drank. Just sat by the window with my phone clutched in my hand, waiting for it to light up. Every time it buzzed, my heart leapt, only to crash when it wasn't her. The silence between calls pressed down like a weight I couldn't push off. By the second night, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove aimlessly through the city, retracing every path she might have taken. Her favorite coffee shop. the long road near the river where she liked to walk when she was upset. The parking lot of the grocery store where we'd had our last stupid argument about nothing. Each place was empty, each corner swallowed by shadows. At one point, I pulled over by the park and just sat there, forehead pressed against the steering wheel, tears burning hot in my eyes. I remembered her laugh echoing across the swings, the way she used to tip her head back and close her eyes when the wind caught her hair. It felt impossible that someone so alive could just vanish. The detective called me the next morning. His voice was steady, almost too steady, like he'd delivered this speech 100 times before. "We'll do what we can, but you need to prepare yourself. Sometimes people don't want to be found." I wanted to scream at him. To shake him and tell him he didn't know her the way I did. She would never disappear by choice. Not from her family. Not from me. But instead I just sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to my own heartbeat thunder in the silence. And for the first time, I began to wonder if maybe everyone else was right, if maybe I didn't know her as well as I thought. By day 3 I had memorized the shape of her absence. The house held it like a bruise. Her mug drying on the rack, her sweater thrown over the back of the chair, the faint powdery smell of her dry shampoo lingering in the hallway. I tried to keep busy, to scrub counters that were already clean, to reorganize drawers that didn't need organizing, but the quiet kept expanding until it pressed on my ears. I opened her laptop like it might bite me. I knew it was a line I shouldn't cross, but the alternative was sitting still and doing nothing while my chest tore itself in half. Her desktop was a chaos of screenshots and notes. I clicked a file called Lists, and there it was, 2 columns in a plain document. Reasons to stay. And reasons to go. My name appeared on both sides in 100 different ways. He makes me laugh was pinned to stay. He doesn't listen when he's tired was taped to go. My throat tightened. This wasn't a crime scene, it was a heartbreak autopsy. Buried in her email drafts was one message addressed to me, unsent. "I don't know how to tell you I can't breathe here anymore. I love you, but every day I feel smaller. I'm scared of what leaving looks like, and I'm scared of what staying means." The timestamp was from a week before she disappeared. I stared at the blinking cursor at the end of that sentence until my eyes burned. A ping jolted me, an automated bank alert on her phone. A charge from a bus station 2 towns over. The time matched the night she went dark. I drove before I even realized I'd grabbed the keys. At the station, the woman at the counter didn't look up when I asked about cameras. "We don't show footage," she said, then paused when she saw my face. "You can't be here for a case, can you? Please," I said, voice cracking. "She's missing." 10 minutes later, in a cramped back office that smelled like old coffee and dust, a grainy screen showed her, hood up, bag slung across her chest, head down. She wasn't running. She was walking with the tentative resolve of someone who'd decided to step off a familiar edge. She bought a ticket to a coastal town we'd once talked about visiting and vanished into a bus's dark belly. The man beside me handed back my ID like he was returning a fragile thing. "Looks like she left on purpose," he murmured. I stepped into the wind of the parking lot, blinking against the sudden light. On purpose. The words didn't let me off the hook, they wrapped around me. She hadn't been taken. She'd left because something between us had become unlivable. I sat in the car, forehead against the wheel, the ocean town's name looping through my mind until it scraped. Then I put the car in gear. If she'd gone there to breathe, I needed to see how far from me breathing had to be. And with that, I started driving toward the edge of what we were. The highway unwound like a long confession. Fields pressed flat by wind, a broken-backed barn, a diner with a flickering sign. With every mile marker I passed, the story I'd been telling myself, someone took her from me, shed another layer until only the quiet truth remained, she took herself. The hurt didn't shrink, it changed shape. The coastal town wasn't dramatic. It was a stripe of storefronts facing a gray sliver of sea, gulls stitching white arcs in the sky. I parked near a laundromat and walked until I found the kind of motel you pick when you want to be no one. Single story, faded curtains, a bell that dinged when I opened the office door. The clerk looked up with the wary kindness of someone used to stray grief. When I showed him her photo, his mouth softened. She checked in 2 nights ago. Paid cash. Room 7. My legs went glassy on the short walk down the breezeway. I knocked like a thief would knock, apologetic, ready to run. The door opened a crack, chain on. Her eye appeared, then widened. The chain rattled, the door opened. For a breath, neither of us spoke. She was smaller than I remembered, or maybe she was the same, and I'd inflated her absence. Hair pulled into a loose bun, sweatshirt I recognized, bare feet on thin carpet. Behind her, the room smelled like salt and cheap soap. I wasn't lost, she said first, voice low. I know, I said, and meant it in more ways than one. We sat on the end of the bed, a polite gulf between us. Up close, I saw the sleeplessness erasing the edges of her. I tried to write to you, she said, rubbing her thumb over her palm. Every sentence turned into a fight we'd already had. My mouth was dry. You could have told me you were leaving. I've been telling you for months, she whispered. Not angry, exhausted. In small ways. I'd say I felt alone and you'd say we'll go out this weekend and then we wouldn't. I'd say I was overwhelmed and you'd say we're all overwhelmed. I wasn't asking you to fix everything. I just needed you to hear me. The words landed where the drafts had pointed. I turned them over, felt the places I'd reached for solutions when she'd wanted a witness, the nights I'd armor-plated with jokes because vulnerability scared me more than any argument. So you ran, I said, and it wasn't accusation, just shape. She nodded, eyes wet but steady. I ran before I said something I couldn't take back. Before staying turned me into someone I didn't recognize. Her hand hovered between us, then fell to her lap. I'm sorry for scaring you. That part wasn't fair. The room hummed with the old AC. Outside, a gull screamed like a hinge. I wanted to ask if she still loved me. The question felt too blunt for the moment. Instead, I asked, What now? I don't know. A small, helpless laugh. I came here to breathe and ended up writing letters I didn't send. I don't want to go back to how it was. And I don't want to burn us down just to feel a clean emptiness. We stared at the carpet pattern like it might offer a map. There was no clean answer. There never is. Only the next honest thing. I can give you space, I said. It's great to say it. Not as punishment. As proof I can listen when you say you need it. She closed her eyes like the sentence washed over a sunburn. I need a little time, she said. And then maybe we meet for coffee. No expectations. Just 2 people who cared about each other enough to try again at being kind. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't a goodbye. It felt like opening a window in a stale room. We sat with that air between us, fragile and almost good. When I stood to leave, she walked me to the door. The hallway smelled like detergent and sea air. Text me you got back safe? She asked. I nodded. We hesitated, 1,000 familiar muscle memories wanting to reach across the new rules, then didn't. I stepped into the late afternoon, the ocean dragging its gray breath across the sand, thinking about how sometimes missing isn't about location. It's about the distance between what's said and what's heard. And on the drive home, I started measuring mine. You think closure is a door you shut, a satisfying click that says this chapter is over. It isn't. It's more like tidying a room that keeps collecting dust. Weeks after the motel, I still found little drifts of her, hair tie in the glove box, notes in the margins of cookbooks, the tilt of my life trying to remember how to balance without her hands on it. We texted carefully, like people carrying hot mugs. I learned to answer with presence instead of solutions. Bad day at work. Tell me about it, I'd say, and then listen while she unraveled it without reaching to tie it back up. She asked about my sleep, about whether I'd fixed the sink, about the plant we always forgot to water. We met for coffee 2 weeks later at a cafe with a window seat and a noisy espresso machine that covered our awkward pauses. She looked lighter, not because she was away from me, but because she was closer to herself. I wanted to be generous enough to see that, and not make it a wound. Friends asked if we were getting back together. I told them the truth we were living, we were practicing being human to each other again. Practicing the small courtesies we'd skipped when we were tired and scared. We didn't move back in. We didn't make promises our exhaustion couldn't keep. We just kept choosing not to turn away. One night I stood in the kitchen with the window open, listening to traffic soften into crickets, her unsent draft open on my phone, the one about not being able to breathe. I typed a reply I'd never sent, "I'm sorry I made the air feel thin." Then I closed it, because some apologies are a door you walk through, not a sentence you hand over. The detective called to close the case. He sounded relieved, paperwork satisfied. "She wasn't missing after all," he said. I thanked him, hung up, and stood there with the oddness of it. Because she had been missing. From her life, from the way we used to look at each other, from the space where we could be soft without bracing. We'd both been missing, really. Just in different rooms. A month later, on a quiet Sunday, I passed the coastal bus station on purpose. The same gulls, the same faded sign. I didn't stop. I didn't need the footage anymore. I had the story we were telling now, and it was made of smaller, kinder scenes. Got home safe. Proud of you today. Do you want the last slice? I don't know where we'll land. Maybe we find our way back in a shape that fits. Maybe we learn to wave at each other across separate lives without flinching. What I know is this: the night she didn't come home taught me that loving someone isn't the same as keeping them. Sometimes love is learning to loosen your grip so both of you can breathe. When people ask what happened, I keep it simple. She went missing, I say, and let them hear the mystery in it if they need to. The truth is quieter. She walked toward herself, and I learned to stop confusing holding with holding on. And if there's a door that clicks now, it's the one I leave open, so air can move, and so we can too. Story 6. I started a war with my neighbor. It started with a fence. Or more accurately, the absence of one. Our houses sit side by side on a street where everyone keeps their yards neat, hedges trimmed, flowers in bloom. My place wasn't perfect, but I kept it respectable. His? He treated the lawn like a landfill. Rusting bikes, broken furniture, weeds tall enough to hide a dog. At first, I told myself to ignore it. We weren't friends, just neighbors. People live how they want. But then his trash started drifting, empty beer cans rolling into my driveway, cigarette butts scattered across my grass. One morning I found his dog had dug up the flower bed my kids had planted for Mother's Day. I knocked on his door, polite smile plastered on my face. He opened it shirtless, a beer already in hand though it was barely noon. "Yeah? Hey," I said carefully. "I think your dog's been in my yard. Could you maybe?" He cut me off with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Dogs wander. Build a fence if it bothers you." Then he shut the door. I stood there with my jaw clenched, staring at the chipped paint on his porch. Build a fence. Like it was my job to fix his mess. That night, I replayed the interaction 100 times while lying in bed. His smug tone, the way he dismissed me like I was some annoying fly buzzing at his ear. By morning, the anger had hardened into something sharper. I didn't want a fence. I didn't want to wall myself off just because he couldn't respect basic decency. What I wanted was for him to understand he couldn't walk all over me. So I started small. Every time his trash landed in my yard, I tossed it back, sometimes gently, sometimes not. When his dog wandered over, I sprayed it with the hose until it yelped and ran home. Petty, maybe. But it felt good. Like I was clawing back ground he'd stolen. The problem with petty wars, though, is they escalate fast. And mine was about to. The first sign he noticed came a week later. I woke up to find my garbage can tipped over, its contents spilled across the curb like a crime scene. Coffee grounds, takeout containers, paper towels fluttering in the breeze. At first I thought it was raccoons, until I saw the cigarette butt crushed right on top of the mess. His brand. I cleaned it up with my hands shaking, fury bubbling hot in my chest. He wanted to play games? Fine. Two could play. That night, after the street went quiet, I dragged a bag of his junk, old pizza boxes, empty beer cans, even a stained mattress that had been leaning against his garage for months, right onto his porch. Left it there like a gift. By morning, I watched from behind my blinds as he cursed and hauled it back inside. He didn't look over at me, but I knew he knew. From then on, it was tit for tat. My sprinklers, accidentally, sprayed into his yard. His car mysteriously wound up with eggshells drying on the hood. I trimmed my hedges exactly along the property line, leaving the branches to fall on his side. He started blasting music at 2 a.m., bass shaking my windows until the kids woke up crying. The street became a battleground, neighbors peeking through curtains, whispering but never stepping in. Some of them probably thought I was the crazy one. Maybe I was. But every time I thought about backing down, I pictured his smirk, his dismissive laugh, and I dug in deeper. One Saturday, I came home to find spray paint scrawled across my fence. Get out! My stomach dropped. This wasn't just petty anymore. It was a threat. I called the police, hands trembling as I held the phone. The officer came, took a few photos, and shrugged. Could be kids, he said, like the letters weren't still dripping red down my fence. But I knew it wasn't kids. It was him. And if he wanted war, then war was exactly what he was going to get. After the spray paint, things stopped being subtle. He wasn't hiding his contempt anymore, and neither was I. Every time I stepped outside, I felt his eyes on me from his porch. Sometimes he'd spit onto the sidewalk just loud enough for me to hear. Other times he'd smirk, like he was daring me to make the next move. I started keeping a notebook, dates, times, every incident. Trash dumped. Music blasted. Dog unleashed. I wasn't just being paranoid anymore. I was building a case. My lawyer friend told me to document everything. Paper trail wins wars, he said. So I wrote it all down, even when my hands shook too much to keep the lines straight. The kids began to notice. My daughter asked why the man next door always looked so angry. My son cried when the music woke him up at midnight. Their fear stoked something primal in me. This wasn't just about a messy lawn anymore. It was about protecting the little space of peace my family had. One evening, as I pulled into the driveway, I saw him standing in his yard holding a beer, staring straight at me. He didn't move, didn't look away, just raised the can in a mock toast. My blood ran hot. I got out of the car and for a second, I swear, I almost marched over. But then I saw my kids peeking through the window, wide-eyed, and I stopped. Instead, I turned my energy into something he couldn't ignore. I filed a formal complaint with the city. Photos of the junk pile, records of the noise, even the spray paint on my fence. Bureaucracy was slow, but it was steady. And a week later, an inspector showed up at his door. I watched from behind my blinds as the man who had laughed in my face was forced to listen while someone else pointed at his mess, clipboard in hand. He slammed the door so hard the inspector flinched. That night, though, he retaliated. I woke up to the sound of glass shattering, a rock through my front window, wrapped in a greasy fast food bag. My kids screamed. My heart pounded as I held them close, glass crunching under my bare feet. That was the moment I realized, this wasn't just neighbor drama anymore. This was dangerous. And I'd started something neither of us could walk away from without scars. I didn't sleep after the rock came through the window. I sat in the living room with a baseball bat across my knees, every creak of the house making my muscles tense. My kids had retreated to my room, curled together under the blankets, too scared to close their eyes. I hated that they had to see this, that they had to live inside my anger. The next morning, I called the police again. This time they came, took photos of the broken glass, asked a few questions, and left with the same shrug they always seemed to have. No witnesses, no cameras, the officer said. Not much we can do. Not much they could do, maybe. But I could. I bought cameras that afternoon, setting them up around the porch, the driveway, the yard. Black lenses blinking like silent witnesses. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small sense of control returning. He noticed, of course. 2 days later, he stood in his yard, arms crossed, glaring at the little red lights on my fence like they were personal insults. Then he shouted across the grass, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "You think that's gonna save you?" The blinds rustled up and down the block as neighbors peeked out. I didn't answer him. Just stared back until he spat on the ground and stomped inside. That night, my cameras caught him pacing his porch, muttering to himself, glancing over at my house like it was daring him. He didn't do anything, just circled and stared until nearly dawn. Watching it back the next morning sent a shiver down my spine. This was more than petty revenge now. He was unraveling, and so was I. Every part of my day was shaped by his presence: how I parked, when I let the kids out to play, whether I dared to step into my own backyard. I'd wanted to win. To prove he couldn't walk all over me. But now, sitting in my living room with the blinds drawn and the bat still propped by the door, I couldn't shake the truth. This war wasn't about winning anymore. It was about surviving. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday evening. The sky had been gray all day, heavy with thunder, the kind of weather that makes everything feel sharper. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard it, a loud bang against the side of the house. My heart lurched. I grabbed the bat and ran to the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. There he was. Standing in the rain, soaked through, arms spread wide like he was daring me to come out. His voice cracked across the street. "You think you're better than me? You think you can run me out?" Neighbors' curtains fluttered, faces half hidden. I knew they were watching. My kids were crying from the hallway, begging me not to go outside. And for a moment, rage surged hot enough that I almost did. I almost stepped onto the porch, bat in hand, ready to end it one way or another. But then I saw my daughter's face, eyes wide, cheeks streaked with tears, and I froze. This war had stopped being about him a long time ago. It was about me. About what kind of father I was going to be. About whether I let my pride turn me into something as small and bitter as the man screaming in the rain. So I didn't go outside. I called the police instead, voice steady this time, no begging, no anger. Just facts. They came quicker than usual, lights flashing blue across the wet pavement. He was still yelling when they cuffed him, his words slurring into nonsense. Drunk again. The officer gave me a nod before driving away. My neighbors slumped in the back seat. The rain kept falling, washing streaks of mud down the street, erasing the evidence of another night lost to our feud. The house felt different when I stepped back inside, quiet, but not the suffocating kind. My kids wrapped their arms around me, still trembling, and for the first time in months, I let the bat drop to the floor. The cameras are still up. The fence is still scarred with spray paint. But I don't glance at his house every morning anymore. I don't circle the block at night. Because the war is over. And even though I'll never forget the wreckage it caused, I learned something in the middle of all that anger. Sometimes the real victory isn't in striking back. It's in deciding not to swing at all. Story 7. She destroyed my life. If you told me 2 years ago that one person could dismantle everything I'd built with just a few carefully chosen moves, I wouldn't have believed you. I used to think my life was stable, job I enjoyed, a small circle of friends I trusted, and her. Always her. The person I thought was my anchor. But anchors can drag you under just as easily as they keep you steady. Her name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is the way she walked into my life like sunlight through a window, warm, blinding, irresistible. Everyone loved her. My friends said I was lucky. My parents welcomed her with open arms. And for a while, I believed she was the best thing that had ever happened to me. Then the cracks began. Small at first. Little lies I brushed off, white lies I told myself. She forgot to mention texts from an ex. She accidentally left out details about where she'd been. She smiled too easily when someone else made her laugh. I ignored it. Love makes you blind, and I wanted so badly to believe in us. The unraveling didn't come all at once. It came like a slow leak you don't notice until the floor is already warped. One day I came into work and found whispers floating around the office. Her name mixed in with mine, rumors I couldn't untangle. My boss pulled me aside, asked if I'd been sharing confidential information. I had no idea what he was talking about. But she did. She'd been the one feeding pieces of my work, twisting them into stories that made me look reckless. I didn't know it then. All I knew was my reputation was slipping through my fingers, and she was the only one holding me tight, whispering, "Don't worry, I'll be here no matter what." It wasn't until much later I realized she was the one loosening my grip all along. And by the time I found out, it was already too late. The first real hit came when I lost my job. One Monday morning, I was called into HR, sat across from two people who wouldn't meet my eyes, and told my conduct had raised too many concerns. They used words like trust breach and internal instability. I walked out of that office with a box of my things and a knot in my stomach. When I told her, she pulled me into her arms, stroked my hair, whispered that it wasn't my fault. "You'll land on your feet," she said. "You're too smart not to." And I believed her. She was all I had left then. But little things didn't add up. Friends stopped texting me back. Invites dried up. I'd see photos on social media, dinners, parties, trips, things I used to be part of. When I asked why no one reached out anymore, she sighed, eyes sad but steady. "They think you've changed," she said. "They think you're unstable." Her words stuck like burrs. I told myself she was just being honest, that she was the only one brave enough to tell me the truth. So I leaned on her more. Trusted her more. Let her opinions replace my own when mine started to falter. Until one night, months later, I caught a glimpse of her phone lighting up on the counter. A message preview glowed in the dark kitchen. "He actually believes it. LOL. He's not even fighting back anymore." My stomach dropped. I picked up the phone, hands trembling, and read the thread. Conversations with people I once called friends. Screenshots of my rants, my fears, twisted into jokes. She wasn't just talking about me, she was orchestrating the whole collapse. The rumors at work. The silence from my friends. The distance from my family. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't paranoia. It was her. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd engineered the destruction, piece by piece, until the life I'd built crumbled at my feet. And the worst part? I thanked her for holding me while she did it. I didn't confront her right away. I wish I could say I stormed into the living room, phone in hand, demanding answers. But the truth is I froze. I stood there in the kitchen with the glow of her messages burning into my eyes, my chest caving in like I'd been punched. My heart wanted to scream, but my mind whispered the most dangerous word of all, maybe. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe the texts weren't about me. Maybe she was just venting. Denial is a cruel comfort. So I pretended. For a week I went about my days like nothing had changed, even as every moment with her felt poisoned. When she kissed me, I felt the laughter of those messages. When she held my hand, I remembered the words. "He actually believes it." Every touch turned to glass in my chest. The breaking point came when my mom stopped answering my calls. We'd always been close, but now when I tried to reach her, it went straight to voicemail. Then one evening I drove to her house, desperate just to see her, and she barely opened the door. Her eyes were tired, her smile tight. "I think it's better if you give us some space," she said. Space? From my own mother? I asked why, begged her to explain, but all she said was, "You need help, sweetheart. We can't keep enabling this." And then she shut the door. I sat in my car shaking, replaying every word, every look. Help. That was her word. The same word my girlfriend had used the night before when she sighed and said, "People are worried about you. They think you're unraveling." And that's when the last pieces clicked. The whispers at work, the silence from friends, my own family closing ranks against me. It wasn't coincidence. It was her. She'd poisoned every well until no one believed me anymore. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. For the first time, I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt erased. And I knew I couldn't keep pretending. That night, I walked back into our apartment with my chest tight, the silence between us louder than any argument we'd ever had. She was on the couch, scrolling her phone, bare feet tucked under her like nothing in the world was wrong. I stood there watching her, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to let it go, to avoid the storm, but I couldn't live inside her lie anymore. "I saw your messages," I said finally. My voice sounded foreign, raw and jagged. Her head snapped up. For a moment, her eyes widened, just enough for me to know she understood exactly what I meant. Then she set the phone down carefully, almost too calmly. "What messages?" "Don't do that," I snapped. "Don't act like you don't know. I read them. You've been talking to my friends. To my family. Spinning stories. Making me look crazy while you sit here pretending to be the only one who cares." Her lips parted, then pressed into a thin line. She leaned back against the couch, crossing her arms. "So you went through my phone." That was her angle. Not guilt. Not denial. Deflection. "Yes," I shot back. "And I'd do it again. Because you've been tearing me down piece by piece while I thought you were building me up. You cost me my job. You cost me my friends. You cost me my family." My voice broke on the last word. "You destroyed my life." She didn't flinch. Didn't apologize. She just tilted her head like she was studying me. "Or maybe," she said softly, "you destroyed it yourself. And you just don't want to admit it." The words landed like ice water. Cruel. Precise. And maybe the worst part was how easily she said them, like she'd been rehearsing. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Then I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me so hard the frame rattled. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew if I stayed another second, I'd drown completely in her version of me. I ended up at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. The waitress poured me coffee without asking, and I sat there staring into the steam like it held some kind of answer. My phone buzzed again and again. Her name flashing across the screen, then my mom's, then a friend I hadn't heard from in months. I didn't answer. Not anymore. For the first time in months, the noise around me wasn't her words. It was the clink of dishes, the low murmur of strangers, the hum of the fluorescent lights. It felt almost clean. I replayed everything in my head, how she'd wormed her way into every corner of my life, how she'd turned people I loved into doubters, how she'd managed to convince me that I was the problem. And I realized something: she hadn't destroyed me. Not really. She'd just torn down the scaffolding I'd been leaning on. The friendships, the family ties, even my job, maybe they were weaker than I thought if one person's whispers could topple them. But me? I was still sitting here. Still breathing. Still alive, even after the wreckage. By the time the sun started bleeding over the horizon, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going back. Not to her, not to the apartment, not to the life she'd rewritten for me. If everyone believed her lies, fine. I'd build something new where her voice couldn't reach. I paid for my coffee, stepped out into the early morning air, and for the first time in months, I felt light. Raw, bruised, but light. She may have taken my job, my friends, my family's trust. She may have left me standing in the ashes of what used to be my life. But she didn't take me. And that was enough to start over. Story 8. He was in a coma. The call came in the middle of the night. You know the kind, the one that jerks you out of sleep with a chill already crawling through your bones, because nothing good ever comes at 3 a.m. I fumbled for my phone, saw his sister's name on the screen, and before I even answered, I knew something was wrong. Her voice was tight, trembling. "He's in the hospital. There was an accident." He's in a coma. The words didn't make sense at first, like they were spoken underwater. I kept waiting for her to repeat it differently, to tell me I'd misheard. But the silence after her sentence was heavy and real. I drove there on autopilot, streets empty and shining from the rain. Every red light felt like punishment, every second wasted. My hands clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Memories flickered with each mile. His laugh, his stupid jokes, the way he'd always tap twice on my arm before leaving like it was his secret way of saying I'll be back. When I walked into that hospital room, the air was thick with disinfectant and the steady beep of machines. And there he was, my boyfriend, the man who never seemed to stop moving, lying impossibly still. Tubes tangled around him, chest rising and falling only because of the machine. I reached for his hand, cold and limp in mine, and whispered his name. Nothing. Not a twitch. Not a flicker. Just silence, except for the rhythm of the monitor. And in that moment the truth hit me like a blow. I might lose him without ever getting to hear his voice again. The doctors spoke in careful tones, words padded with medical jargon that did little to soften the blow. Severe head trauma. No timeline for recovery. We'll monitor brain activity. Their faces were steady, professional, but their eyes told me what they wouldn't say out loud. They didn't know if he'd ever wake up. I sat by his bed every day, hours bleeding into one another, the hospital walls closing in with their sterile white silence. I brought books to read to him, his favorites, the ones he used to fall asleep to when his head rested on my chest. I played the songs we'd sung in the car, our voices off-key but full of joy. I even told him the dumbest stories, anything just to fill the air so he wouldn't feel alone, wherever his mind was. But the hardest part was the not knowing. Was he in there? Could he hear me? Or was I just pouring my love into an empty shell, hoping against hope that something seeped through? His family tried to be strong, but I could see the cracks. His mom sat stiff in her chair, clutching rosary beads until her knuckles turned white. His sister cried in the hallway, muffling her sobs against her sleeve. And me? I tried to be the rock. The one who said, "He'll come back. He's too stubborn not to." But at night, when I went home to our apartment, the silence tore me open. His jacket still hung by the door. His shoes sat where he'd kicked them off. Our bed felt too big, the sheets cold without his warmth. I'd curl up on his side, bury my face in the pillow, and cry until I couldn't breathe. Every morning I came back, though. Every morning I sat by his side, took his hand, and whispered, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Because if he could hear me, I wanted him to know that even in the dark, even in the stillness, he wasn't alone. Time in a hospital doesn't pass the same way as outside. Days blur into each other, measured not by sunrises or sunsets, but by the rotation of nurses, the beep of machines, the squeak of shoes in the hallway. I lost track of how long I'd been sitting in that chair by his bed. 1 week? 2? It didn't matter. All that mattered was that he was still there, suspended somewhere between me and nothingness. At first, people came. Friends, coworkers, cousins who hadn't seen him in years. They'd bring flowers, cards, awkward smiles that never reached their eyes. They'd sit for a while, fidgeting with their hands, then leave, their voices hushed in the hallway. "It's so sad. I don't think he'll make it." Eventually, the visits slowed. People have lives to return to. Responsibilities. But me, I couldn't leave him. Every time I thought about stepping away, about taking even one day off, fear gripped me. What if he wakes up and I'm not there? So I stayed. And staying meant I started to unravel. My body ached from the stiff chair, my skin smelled of antiseptic, my reflection in the bathroom mirror showed dark circles and hollow cheeks. I hardly recognized myself. The doctors kept their distance now, repeating the same careful words. "We'll see. Time will tell." I hated those phrases. They felt like excuses, like ways to prepare me for the worst without having to say it outright. One night, when the hospital was quiet, I leaned close to him, pressing my forehead against his arm. "Do you even know I'm here?" I whispered. My voice cracked. Because I don't know how much longer I can do this without you. The monitor beeped steady, indifferent. His chest rose and fell with the machine's rhythm. And still, I held his hand. Because even if he didn't know, even if he couldn't feel me, I needed to believe that some part of him was fighting his way back. It was in the third week when something changed. I was half asleep in the chair, my head tilted against the edge of his bed, when I felt it, a faint twitch under my palm. At first, I thought I was dreaming. My heart leapt into my throat. I sat up fast, clutching his hand tighter. Do that again, I whispered. Please. For a long moment, nothing. Just the steady beeping, the whoosh of the ventilator. Then there it was. A flicker. His fingers moved, not much, just enough to send my whole body into shock. I hit the call button, voice shaking as I told the nurse what I'd seen. She came in calm, professional, checking his vitals like I hadn't just witnessed a miracle. It could be reflexes, she said carefully. Don't get your hopes up too high. But my hopes were already sky high. Reflex or not, it was something. And after weeks of nothing but stillness, something felt like a thunderclap. That night, I talked to him more than ever. I told him stories of when we first met, of the trip we'd been planning, of the dumb arguments we'd had about movies and pizza toppings. I poured everything into the silence, believing that maybe, just maybe, he could hear me. Over the next few days, the signs grew stronger. A twitch in his eyelids. A shift in his breathing. The doctors finally admitted what I already knew in my heart. He was fighting his way back. The waiting didn't get easier. If anything, the hope made it harder. Every time his fingers twitched, I wanted his eyes to open. Every flicker made the silence after feel heavier. But one morning, as I sat holding his hand, whispering the same words I'd said every day, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. His lips moved. Barely. A dry, broken sound slipped out, but it was enough. Tears blurred my vision as I leaned closer. Say it again, I begged. And this time, with the smallest rasp of breath, he whispered back. Hey. The first word was barely a whisper, but it cracked the silence wide open. Nurses rushed in, followed by the doctor, their voices suddenly urgent where they'd once been cautious. I stood back, heart pounding, as they checked monitors and adjusted wires. But when the commotion settled, his eyes fluttered open, heavy, unfocused, but alive. Alive. Tears streaked down my cheeks before I could stop them. I took his hand again, clutching it like I was afraid it might vanish. You came back, I whispered. His lips curved into the faintest ghost of a smile. His voice was raspy, broken, but I could hear the echo of him in it. Told you. I'm stubborn. The days that followed were slow, harder in some ways than the waiting had been. He couldn't move much at first, could barely string more than a few words together. Physical therapy sessions left him exhausted, and sometimes he'd look at me with eyes full of frustration, like he hated being trapped in his own body. But every time, I reminded him of the simple truth: he was still here. We were still here. And little by little, the pieces came back. A longer conversation. A shaky step. The first time he laughed again, hoarse but real, I thought my chest might split open from relief. Not everything went back to the way it was. Some scars stay, visible or not. We had to relearn patience, relearn how to live in a world that had nearly stolen him away. But we also relearned how to hold each other without taking it for granted. Sometimes at night, I still wake up and listen for his breathing, my heart lurching in old patterns of fear. Then I feel his arms slide around me, warm and real, and I remember, we made it through. He was in a coma. He could have stayed gone. But he didn't. He came back. And even if the world falls apart again someday, I know one thing with absolute certainty: I'll never stop holding on to that miracle. Story 9. She laced my coffee. It started with a bitter taste. Not the usual too strong brew or burnt beans. I know my coffee. This was sharp, metallic, wrong. I frowned into the mug that morning, watching her bustle around the kitchen, humming like everything was normal. "You put something different in here?" I asked, swirling the dark liquid. She didn't look up. "Just the usual cream and sugar." Her voice was smooth, casual, but something in the way she avoided my eyes made my stomach twist. I set the mug down without another sip. We'd been together 3 years. Long enough to know each other's habits, long enough to know when something was off. And lately, everything felt off. She was quicker to anger, sharper with her words. Nights she used to spend curled beside me were now spent on her phone in another room. I told myself it was stress, that everyone goes through phases. But that coffee, too bitter, too strange, planted a seed of doubt I couldn't shake. The next morning, the same thing. Metallic. Off. My tongue tingled, and my head throbbed by noon. "Maybe it's the water filter," she said when I mentioned it again, this time with an edge of annoyance. "Not everything is a conspiracy, you know." But later that day, while she was out, I checked the cupboard. Behind the coffee tin sat a small unmarked bag, powder fine as flour. I dipped a finger in, touched it to my tongue, instantly bitter chemical, wrong. My stomach dropped. That was the moment I realized, this wasn't paranoia. Something was seriously, dangerously wrong. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every sound in the house magnified, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, her even breathing beside me. My mind kept circling back to that bag in the cupboard. What was it? Why hide it behind the coffee? By morning I had a plan. I let her make the coffee as usual, forced a smile, even took a sip. The bitterness was there again, faint but unmistakable. While she showered, I poured the rest into a travel mug, sealed it tight, and drove straight to a pharmacy on the other side of town. They couldn't test it there, but the pharmacist gave me a list of labs that could. By lunchtime, I'd handed it over, my hands trembling as I signed the paperwork. "Should have results in a few days," the tech said, tucking the mug into a labeled bag. Those days felt like years. Every morning I pretended to drink the coffee. Every night I lay awake wondering what she was doing, what she wanted. I watched her closer, how she insisted on being the one to pour, how her eyes flicked toward my cup before anything else. She was calm, too calm, like she already knew I wouldn't question her. On the third day, my phone rang. The lab. The words came in a flat tone, clinical, almost detached. "We found traces of sedatives in the sample. Non-prescribed. Consistent with diazepam. Sedatives." I felt the world tilt under me. My coffee, the drink I trusted to start my day, the routine I never questioned, she'd been lacing it, dosing me little by little. My first thought was why? What possible reason could she have? To knock me out? To keep me quiet? To make me sick? My second thought was colder, sharper. I had to act before it got worse. I didn't confront her right away. Every instinct screamed at me to demand answers, but I knew if I came at her too soon, she'd spin it, twist it, make me doubt my own eyes. That was her talent, turning everything back on me until I walked away wondering if I'd lost my mind. So I played along. I let her brew the coffee, let her hand me the mug, let her watch as I drank. I got good at faking it, tilting the cup just enough, keeping my lips wet so she'd see the sheen. I'd pour the rest down the sink while she was in the shower, heart hammering in my chest as the liquid swirled into the drain. Meanwhile, I started digging. Old receipts, text logs, anything I could find. One night, when she left her laptop open, I caught sight of an email chain with a name I didn't recognize. A supplier. Pills ordered under the radar, shipped to a P.O. box across town. I sat there staring at the screen, bow rising in my throat. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was proof. But the question kept gnawing at me, why? She wasn't after money, we didn't have much. She wasn't trying to leave, at least not yet. Was it control? Punishment? Some twisted way of keeping me docile, easier to handle? That night, I couldn't stand it anymore. I waited until she was brushing her teeth, then walked into the bathroom, holding the empty coffee mug in my hand. My reflection in the mirror looked pale, hollow-eyed, but steady. "What's in it?" I asked. My voice was low, even, but my hand trembled. She froze, toothbrush halfway to her mouth. "What?" "The coffee. The bag in the cupboard. The sedatives and the test results." For the first time, I saw her mask slip. A flicker of panic crossed her face before she covered it with a laugh. "You're being paranoid. You sound crazy." But I wasn't crazy. Not anymore. I had proof. And as I stood there, staring at her foam-ringed smile in the mirror, I realized the woman I thought I loved was a stranger. She tried to talk over me, voice sharp now, words spilling fast. "You've been stressed, you're imagining things, maybe it's withdrawal from all the caffeine you drink." "Stop." My voice cracked across the bathroom like a whip. For once, she actually went quiet. I set the mug down on the counter between us. "The lab tested it. Diazepam. Weeks of it. Do you know how close you came to screwing up my body? My job? My life?" Her eyes darted to the side, not guilt, but calculation. She was searching for an angle, the way she always did when she got caught in smaller lies. But this wasn't small. This was criminal. Finally, she shrugged, her tone flat. "You were impossible to deal with. Always anxious, always questioning me. I just wanted some peace. To take the edge off. You didn't even notice half the time." Her words hit harder than if she'd screamed. She hadn't done it out of rage or revenge. She'd done it because drugging me was easier than talking to me, easier than leaving, easier than admitting she didn't love me anymore. I gripped the edge of the sink, knuckles white. "Do you hear yourself? You poisoned me because I stressed you out?" She rolled her eyes like I was overreacting. "You're fine. You're standing here, aren't you?" That was the moment the last thread snapped. The woman I thought I knew, the one I trusted to hand me coffee every morning, the one I let into every corner of my life, she wasn't there. Or maybe she never had been. I walked out of the bathroom without another word, grabbed my keys, and left. My hands shook on the steering wheel, but my mind was clear for the first time in weeks. I drove straight to the police station, the lab report folded in my pocket like a lifeline. If she wouldn't see what she'd done, then someone else would make her. Filing the report was both the hardest and the easiest thing I've ever done. Hard because saying the words out loud, "My girlfriend has been drugging me," made my throat feel raw, like I was peeling back skin. Easy because once it was said, once the lab results were in their hands, it wasn't just my burden anymore. The officers didn't laugh, didn't dismiss me. They asked questions, serious ones, and I answered every single one. When I handed over the mug, the receipts, the screenshots of her emails, I felt lighter, like the weight was shifting off me piece by piece. Going back to the apartment was the hardest part. 2 officers came with me, their presence a shield against her sharp tongue. She tried to play it off, tried to laugh, tried to act like I was the crazy one. But when they read her rights, when the cuffs clicked shut, her face went pale in a way I'll never forget. That night, I sat alone in the apartment. The silence was deafening, but it was mine. No bitter taste in my mouth, no cloud of confusion hanging over me. Just me, raw and exhausted, but finally free. Friends and family trickled back once the news spread. Some apologized for doubting me, others admitted they'd noticed something was wrong but hadn't wanted to interfere. My body is still recovering, weeks of being dosed without knowing leaves scars you can't always see. Some days my hands still tremble, some nights I still wake in a sweat, convinced she's leaning over me with a mug in her hands. But I remind myself of this, she didn't win. She tried to break me down quietly, make me doubt myself until I disappeared. And instead I stood up. I told the truth. I walked away. When people ask now why I don't drink coffee anymore, I smile. Because the truth is I can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But what I can do is live without the bitter taste of her poison in my life. And that's enough. Story 10. My roommate lied to me. When you live with someone, you think you know them. You see their habits, their moods, the way they leave the toothpaste cap off or hum when they cook. You think proximity equals truth. But I learned the hard way that living under the same roof doesn't mean you really know who's sleeping across the hall. At first, it was small things. Rent money that was always a few days late. Groceries disappearing faster than I could buy them. Packages showing up with his name, though he swore he didn't order anything. I brushed it off. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has their quirks. But then bigger cracks started showing. One night I came home to find the door unlocked, lights blazing, and him sitting on the couch like nothing was wrong. Forgot. He shrugged when I asked. Another time, my laptop, my work laptop, vanished from my desk. He swore he hadn't touched it, and then 2 days later it showed up under his bed. I wanted to believe him. He was my friend before he was my roommate. We'd known each other since college, shared dorm rooms, shared secrets, shared hangovers that felt like death. Trust was supposed to be the default. But trust only works if both people are playing the same game. The night it all came crashing down, I was already suspicious. Bills weren't adding up, food kept disappearing, and there was a tension in the air whenever I asked him about money. I told myself I'd confront him, really confront him, the next time something happened. And then I opened my bank app. Half my savings gone. Transfers I didn't authorize, withdrawals I never made. And every single one traced back to the same device, mine. My roommate hadn't just lied about the little things. He'd been stealing from me the whole time. I sat there staring at the bank app until the numbers blurred, my pulse hammering in my temples. Half my savings. Months of late nights, overtime shifts, money I'd put away for a future I hadn't even figured out yet, gone. And the worst part was knowing exactly who had done it. When he came through the door that night, laughing into his phone, I was waiting. The second he hung up, I held out my screen. Explain this. His smile faltered, but only for a moment. Then he shrugged, casual, like I'd asked him about the weather. Man, you probably got hacked. It happens. Hacked from my own device? My voice cracked. Don't lie to me. Just tell me why. He dropped his bag onto the counter, opened the fridge, and pulled out a beer. The audacity of it made my stomach turn. Relax. I was gonna pay you back. I just needed some quick cash, alright? It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. Like draining half of what I had to my name was just some harmless accident. I felt heat rising in my face, anger mixing with betrayal until I could barely breathe. You lied to me. 4 months. You sat in this apartment eating my food, drinking my beer, using my stuff, while you were stealing from me. He rolled his eyes, took a long swig, and leaned against the counter. You're being dramatic. We're roommates, not strangers. What's yours is mine, right? That broke something in me. The friendship I thought we had, the years of trust we'd built, it all twisted into something ugly in that moment. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't even ashamed. And I realized this wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that he thought he could hollow me out piece by piece and I'd just let him. I never felt rage like that before, white hot, buzzing in my ears, making it hard to think straight. I wanted to grab him by the collar, shake him until the smug look fell off his face. But instead, I forced myself to sit down at the table, fingers digging into the wood. You're going to pay me back, I said, voice low, steady. Every cent. And you're going to start by transferring what you can tonight. He smirked, like this was some kind of joke. Relax, man. You're acting like I robbed you at gunpoint. I just borrowed it. Stop making me out to be a villain. Borrowed. The word made me want to scream. I pulled up my banking app again, shoved it across the table toward him. Half my savings isn't borrowing. That's theft. And if you don't fix this right now, I'll go to the police. That got his attention. His smirk wavered, just slightly, but he covered it with a laugh. You wouldn't. Come on, you'd really throw away our friendship over some cash? That was when it hit me, the friendship was already gone. Whatever bond we'd had, he'd snapped it the second he decided his convenience was worth more than my trust. I stood, chair scraping against the floor. This isn't about cash. It's about the fact that you looked me in the eye and lied. Over and over. You've been lying for months, and I let you. That's on me. But it ends now. For a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the fridge. His jaw worked, like he wanted to argue, but instead he muttered, "Fine," and pulled out his phone. I watched his fingers move, saw the first transfer pop up on my screen. Only a fraction of what he owed, but enough to prove he could. "You'll get the rest," he said flatly, not looking at me. I wanted to believe him. But deep down, I knew better. Because someone who lies that easily doesn't stop just because they've been caught. For a few days, he acted like he was making it right. Small transfers trickled into my account, 20 here, 50 there, like crumbs tossed to keep me quiet. He cleaned the kitchen for once, bought groceries, even left the door locked when he left. Anyone else might have thought things were getting better. But I could feel it in the air. The shift. He wasn't sorry, he was calculating. Waiting for me to ease up, to stop watching him so closely. One night, I came home late from work to find him on the couch, TV flickering across his face, phone in hand. He didn't notice me at first, and that's when I saw it, the bank app open, my account still logged in. My stomach dropped. "How did you get my password?" I demanded, startling him so bad he nearly dropped the phone. He stammered, then laughed, like I was the crazy one. "You must have saved it on here ages ago. Chill out." But it wasn't an accident. He'd been watching me, memorizing things I typed, waiting until I let my guard down. That was the moment the last of my patience snapped. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "You're done here. You've got until tomorrow to grab your things." His eyes narrowed, the lazy charms slipping away. "You can't just kick me out. My name's on the lease too." "Then I'll break the lease," I shot back. "I'll eat the cost if I have to. But I'm not living under the same roof as someone who steals from me in my sleep." We stared at each other across the room, the tension thick enough to choke on. For the first time, I saw the truth in his eyes, not a friend, not a roommate, but someone who saw me as a mark. He finally stood, brushing past me with a muttered curse. And in that moment I knew, whatever came next, this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about finally cutting myself free from the lie I'd been living. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of drawers slamming. He was packing. Shoving clothes into bags, yanking cords out of outlets, muttering curses under his breath. For a moment, I just stood in the hallway, watching. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for months finally started to lift. When he saw me, he sneered. "You'll regret this. Good luck paying for this place on your own." Maybe he meant it as a threat, but it felt more like freedom. "I'd rather struggle alone than live with someone who poisons my life," I said quietly. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just bitterness. Then he dragged his bags out the door, slammed it behind him, and that was it. The silence that followed was different this time. Not tense, not suffocating. Just quiet. I walked through the apartment slowly, almost in disbelief. The couch was still there. My desk was still there. My life, battered, lighter in the bank account, bruised in ways that didn't show, was still mine. It took weeks to undo the mess he left behind. Changing passwords, fixing bills, explaining to the landlord what had happened. Friends I'd pulled away from started coming back when they saw the truth. Piece by piece, I rebuilt what he'd nearly wrecked. And the strangest thing was this: I wasn't angry anymore. I thought I would be. I thought I'd carry rage for years. But once he was gone, the anger melted into something else: clarity. Because lies can strip you down, hollow you out, make you question your own worth. But once you see them for what they are, you can't unsee them. And the person who lied? They lose the only power they ever had: your trust. Now, when people ask why I live alone, I just smile. Because peace, even with its quiet loneliness, is worth more than any rent split. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, hit subscribe and join us for the next one. Until then, sleep well and take care.